I'm going to take this chunk of scrap cherry and turn it into a really cute little keepsake box. Your friends and family are really going to think you're a master woodworker. When you give them one of these, they're going to cherish it for the rest of their life and probably pass it on down to their kids and their grandkids. I smoothed and cleaned it up on the joiner and planer like you've seen many times. The idea here is pretty simple. Just flood thin CA into these defects. Now it's just a matter of standing these up and resawing the lids off of the boxes, and I'm telling you, there is just nothing like a big horsepower, well-tuned bandsaw that you can just lock the rip fence in and just make a cut just like a table saw. Smooth up the rough bandsaw surfaces with a hand plane. Now you could argue that this number 6 hand plane is too large for this job, but it isn't. It works just fine with a little attention to technique. Plus, I have a really good relationship with this hand plane. You don't need dozens of hand planes either. You just need a few really well-tuned hand planes. So next we're going to cut the sides off the box. I'm going to reset the rip fence just a little narrower than it was for the lid, because the lid has a rabbet on the underside and the sides do not. Next, I'm going to be smoothing up those rough bandsaw cuts. I'm going to do this in a shooting board because it keeps everything square. It keeps the plane square and just ensures a perfectly square cut. This piece, however, has some grain coming and going, so I'm just going to take my best guess as to which way it should go and give it a test. Just a little more to go. Looks like I guessed the right way. Nice and beautiful. I did the other side of the box blank the exact same way. I'm using the box blank to hold the sides square because they're so thin. This worked good enough, but the sides kept sliding back with the hand plane, so I kept my thumbnail on them. I feel like that might have just been a danger close. So next time I'll double stick a little temporary stop block to the shooting board to do that job so I can keep my thumb out of danger. The sides cut off and planed, I'm getting ready to cut off the bottom of the box. But before I do that, I want to make some witness marks just so that I know I'm getting these sides back in the right place when I glue these up. So a couple of witness marks here should do the job, and those will sand or plane right off. Resawing the bottom from the box blank is a simple matter of running it against the bandsaw rip fence. Now, I use this shop-made push block with the table saw, bandsaw, and joiner. You can see it's got some use on it, and it just keeps my fingers safe. With the bottom resawing off of here, now it's just a matter of smoothing these cuts back up, because once again, we're making glue seams for the future. The future. Get my technique right. Try flipping it around. It's pretty rough there. Yeah, that's better, except for right in this area. So I'm just going to call that good because, like I say, with grain coming and going every which way, there's not going to be any perfect answer to which direction to hand plane that. Okay, so the next step in this hollowed out box build, I made it fall. So we've already cut off the top, the sides, and the bottom. And now we need to cut the ends off of this blank so that we can glue them back into the box, and then we will have successfully hollowed out this box without using drill presses and routers and chisels and sandpaper and all that miserable mess. I am just not into that. I set up the stop block, so I'm just shaving the end of the blank off. Now I inadvertently removed the witness marks doing this, which made me scratch my head for a minute, but it wasn't any big deal in the end. I moved the stop block over exactly 1/2 inch, allowing for a 1/8 inch saw curve, leaving a 3/8 box side. I moved the stop block over a 1/2 inch again and cut the second side. As you can see, I have successfully cut out all the parts for the box, and I'm going to show you how this whole center block is now comes out, and you can continue to make boxes out of these if they're big enough. Now I might not continue to cut the tops off of these. I might get the top from a separate piece of wood, but you can continue making boxes with the blank that's left over. So let's reassemble a little bit here, and you can see we have a hollowed out box with a lid that came right off of the top. So we'll glue this all back up in the same order so that it just looks as much like a seamless piece of wood as possible. And I also need to trim these sides down to match the height of the ends. The bandsaw kerf and re-smoothing process, we lost some material here, so the sides are a little taller than ends. No big deal, I'll take care of that right here on the shooting board. And I will also sand the insides of these just with 220. I'll just take the insides of these and hit them with 220 till they look nice and smooth, and any burning from the table saw is gone. Doesn't even take a minute. And I'll do the same to the other side. The shooting board makes pretty easy work of trimming the sides to match the ends. I dry clamp the box together with large parallel clamps because they apply force evenly. This keeps the parts from sliding around during glue up, and I'm using thin CA glue as the glue and also as the finish. I apply the glue to the seams first, allowing capillary action to wick the water thin glue into the seams. I move immediately into finishing the inside of the box. The foam brush worked really well to apply the CA to all the surfaces, but it's a one-time use thing. Well worth the 99 cents, however, in my opinion. The CA penetrates the wood really well, and I wipe up the excess before it starts to set up so that I avoid a total mess. I don't want all the ridges and junk that would come along with that and having to sand inside the box. And getting rid of it now also helps me achieve that satin kind of finish that I'm going for. Doing the glue up and finish in one step is a huge time saver. I don't have to wait several hours for traditional wood glue to cure, and I don't have to worry about the glue squeeze out affecting the finish, since the glue and the finish are the exact same product. Now, I chose to hit this with activator, but in hindsight I shouldn't have used it. The fumes from this stuff just really kicked my butt, and it only saved a few minutes since CA cures really fast. And by the way, CA cures in the presence of moisture. It doesn't evaporate like glue or varnish. It was a little challenging to break these clamps loose because some CA glue got in there. Fortunately, CA doesn't adhere to plastic all that well, so I was able to get them loose. In the future, I'll put some masking tape on them to aid in breaking the clamps loose. But as you can see, this proves the CA glue joints, the glue did wick in there, and the joints are tough enough. This little box probably just saw more stress than it ever will again in its lifetime. Since I adjusted the depth of cut when I sized the sides, I need to check it. I back the blade out and use a piece of scrap poplar that I keep just for this purpose. I advance the blade and take a light until I get a light shaving. Then I know I'm ready to smooth off the bottom of the box. The ridges in the CA are a little tough to get through at first, but they go away after a few passes. Well, there's no better way to smooth the bottom of this box than a hand plane. You can sand it, of course, but most woodworkers hate sanding, which is interesting, that most woodworkers hate sanding, but then most woodworkers don't use hand planes, which eliminates 90% of sanding. And that's just sort of odd to me. I don't understand that. After the bottom is hand plane smooth, I hit it with 220 grit sandpaper. It only takes a few seconds, and I skipped the 80, 100, 120, 150, and 180 grit sandpapers that are typically used after coming off of a joiner or planer. Now it's time to trim off the ends of the box. You can really see how well the CA glue wicked from the inside to the outside of the glue seams. I adjust the stop block until I remove the unevenness of the ends. I made the ends thicker than the final dimensions so I could trim them up like this. You may have noticed that there's some unevenness around the top of the box. I'm trimming everything flush on the table saw. Since I had to remove the blade guard to make this cut, I'm being extra careful, and I'm using this piece of MDF to push the box against the rip fence to keep my fingers well away from the blade. I work around all 4 edges of the box, adjusting the rip fence as needed until I get the final dimension that I need, and run all 4 edges, of course, at that final dimension. Once I'm done at the table saw, I use 220 grit sandpaper on my bench to sand everything even and get it ready for finish. While sanding, I decided I wasn't happy with the chip out left by the table saw, so it's probably time for a new blade. I also don't care for the amount of overhang the lid currently has. Since the ends are still plenty thick, I'm going to trim them on the table saw again and limit the amount of chip out this time. This time I'm using the regular miter gauge that has a wood fence attached. The wood fence will support the wood fibers of the box and greatly lessen any chip out. I'm using a small clamp to keep my hands away from the blade and to keep the box from sliding around while I make the cut. Yes, that does happen sometimes with small parts. I sanded the first box side to get rid of the burning that's so common when working with cherry. Only using 220 and elbow grease took exactly 2 minutes. For the second side, I decided to use the hand plane and shooting board to see if that would cut the time. Total time to plane and sand the second end was 2 minutes and 10 seconds. While the hand plane did less than sanding time, it wasn't any faster than hand sanding overall. I spent a few more minutes sanding the outside of the box and just breaking any sharp edges in preparation for finish. This part's gotta be right because people are gonna pick this box up and handle it, and if you leave sharp edges and things like that, people are gonna notice. Next, it's time to cut the rabbet or rebate on the underside of the box lid. I make an initial cut and test fit the box, knowing that it won't fit the first time. I raise the blade a bit and cut again, and then I test fit again. I sneak up on it like this until it's a snug but not tight fit. A slightly loose fit is preferable to a tight fit. I mean, you don't want to struggle to put the lid on and off the box every time you use it. I do the same thing for the rabbet at the box ends. I have to do that separately because the amount of overhang is different on the sides than it is on the ends. I wrap a piece of sandpaper around the leftover box core and sand the rabbet until the burn marks are gone and it's smooth. I also broke any sharp edges with sandpaper in preparation for finish. And then I wiped the entire box and lid with isopropyl alcohol to get rid of any sanding residue. I like to use IPA because it just dries really quickly. Now it's a matter of flooding the thin CA onto the surfaces as quickly as possible and then wiping up the excess with a paper towel before it sets up. If it sets up, it's just way more difficult to sand everything smooth. The humidity in my shop went up significantly after I finished the inside of the box. A CA cures with moisture, so humidity directly affects the cure time. It can be the difference between getting a couple of minutes of working time to only a few seconds. Now, I had opened the door for ventilation to my shop, and the humidity went from about 65% when I finished the inside to about 73% now. And that was a very significant difference to the working time of the CA. This is something I just plan to pay more attention to in the future when using CA. Sand out any imperfections in the CA finish with 220 grit sandpaper. I'm going for a satin finish, so I'm not going to reapply CA unless something really stands out as needing it. That's not trying to build up a gloss finish with CA like you do on pens and stuff like that. Once it's sanded, wipe it clean with IPA. I'm using paste wax as a final top coat to get that buttery smooth matte finish that I'm after. Apply the wax moderately to all surfaces inside and out, let it dry for a minute or two, and just buff it back off with a clean paper towel or a cotton cloth. After that, inspect it for any imperfections of the surface, hold it up to raking light and look at it. And if you find anything, sand those areas that need it and just reapply the wax. No big deal. After seeing the finish at 220 grit, I decided to bump it up to 400 grit and re-wax it. And after seeing the 400 grit finish, I took it up to 800 grit and reapplied wax. And that's what I was after. Just a beautiful, buttery, satiny finish on top of the CA. Now the CA is going to protect this thing forever. I mean, it flooded down into the pores of the wood, into the glue joints. It's really in there, and all the wax is doing is just adding that last little bit of sheen. And probably will never have to be reapplied, but even if it does, it's worth it to just have this gorgeous buttery satin finish.